But you are going Facebook Live too?
Yes, we are going live with Facebook for 4.3 40s on Friday.
Yes, talking a little bit about performance. And here's the beauty of this. It goes beyond your mind. When I say that, Katie, what pops into your mind?
Performance is beyond my mind.
Yeah, performance is beyond your mind.
Well, to me, that sounds like there's no mind hack then to be better at performance. And, everybody's looking for a good mind hack these days. And I just want to remind people that our minds are, the US government is more likely to be hacked than our minds are.
Oh, that's pretty funny. That is pretty funny.
You laugh at my jokes.
It's interesting, though, because what you just said, though, reminds me our brains are files, and sometimes our files get contaminated.
Yeah, and our brains are also a very specific iOS system with very well-traveled roads.
Well, it's interesting. See, you said iOS, which is specific because the other people out there hold it. What about my operating system? So obviously, this is the beauty of when there's a duo. Katie met operating system, and sometimes it's iOS, sometimes it's Android, sometimes it's something else. But that's the point, is that sometimes our minds only stick within that certain framework.
Well, and I only know how to use an iOS, like literally and figuratively. We talk about neurotypical and neurodiverse. We have two different types of nervous systems is what we're pointing to there. So I very much identify with having an iOS system. And what's funny is that Dan is an Android guy. Literally.
Yeah. Well, and it's always interesting to me. So it would be fun to watch you and Dan in the room, and Dan operating an iOS system and you operating an Android system, and see what happens.
Well, either way, what I can tell you is that neither one of us are hacking into the other system. These are just the way our systems run. Yeah. And for those that did get to see Dan in the room when Owl turned 3, they got to see his fear of fire come out. Me holding a flame that's lit up that says 3 on it really freaked Dan out. His system was very concerned about my system's ability to operate fire.
So what are the other systems? Like when you think about that, what else pops into your mind beyond the system of the mind?
The heart and the soul, of course. The systems that when a soul is stirred to move, you don't need to go find courage, and you don't need to go hack your mind, and you don't need to search your heart for the answers. When the soul is stirred to do something, it does.
Okay, you got to tell us more. Got to tell us more. I mean, that's when you dropped a lot there. Courage being one, the soul, obviously the other, and it's in the soul. We really, as a race, don't talk a lot about the soul.
Which race? The human race?
The human race, yes.
Okay, just checking for everybody else listening. So the human race has really been racing. Their minds have been racing a lot, looking for solutions. And if we look at the solutions the mind has created to solve problems of the heart and soul, mental health, we're not very good at it.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet.
Probably because we're looking at it as a brain dysfunction. We're looking at it as a chemical dysfunction. We're looking at it as a dysfunction versus a dis-ease, which you always talk about.
Yeah.
And that dis-ease is dis-ease within the soul that is expressed in the mind through the IQ and the EQ.
And what's interesting about what you said? Even though someone may not know exactly what we're talking about, but they could probably picture, as well as they've probably experienced what it is that we're talking about. They have some aspect of what it is we're talking about without knowing the details.
Yeah.
Because we know when we're out of alignment, and we fight it.
And we know when our soul is stirred to do something. If you know my iOS system, you might put me in a box of procrastinator, avoider, etc. but I have a Facebook memory that tells me it was January 6th when I was first stirred to be explore coaching as a certification and a profession. Not that I've coached in a lot of capacities, but in an executive coach for profession. And I filed my LLC on the 21st of January. That is a soul that was stirred. And an LLC requires a business name. That's it. And some money, $125 in Jersey. But it requires a business name. And my soul was so stirred to invite other souls into my home. I cooked the meal, and then we did a brainstorm on what my business would be named. And we couldn't find an answer with our minds. And after a few hours, someone's like, why don't you do something with owls? You have owls everywhere. And I had this stuffed owl. And I'm like, well, what would it stand for? It would have to stand for something. And a brilliant woman named Dana Baker goes, Outstanding Women Leaders. It's like my soul was just surrounding me, and that is why our objects in our home matters. I see some objects behind you. What speaks to the soul of who you are and behind you there.
Yeah. And it's it seems so obvious sometimes, but sometimes our eyes are clouded or our vision is not clear.
You need an eye doctor. Sometimes, self-awareness. I just told someone this today. There is an art to telling someone they're not self-aware. And that art is just really explaining what self-awareness is. It's observing yourself. It's really being conscious, as if you were out of body and watching yourself and noticing where you feel it in your body, and what's around you. What's around us is there for a reason. I love that we both have this.
Yes.
You bought this. I had a friend give me mine. The universe brought us together, and they brought us together, and we both have this together. Our objects, our treasures matter.
Yes. Yeah. Like this last Friday, I was working with some younger people from an elementary school, and we typically refer to those things we bring with us or around us or as artifacts. And I brought my jerseys to let them know that I used to play football and what that represented. And that in the particular case of what I was sharing with them is, hey, when I was in 5th grade, when I was their age, I was not very good at football. I was horrible. I told them a few good stories, but I also said to them, from 5th grade to 9th grade, as I grew, as I evolved, as I tried to get better in practice, there were some bumps along the way. There were some times I got knocked down. Literally, I remember clearly in my mind running through the gauntlet, which is 2 individuals on each side with a pad in their hand. And I used to run straight up and down. And the one guy who was a senior just knocked me down on my butt. And I was like, that was the best thing to happen to me. It may have been not so pleasant at the moment, but it taught me not to run straight up and down anymore. So that's the piece.
You had a new self-awareness. And what's fun about that is it's like a garden hose that's kinked. As soon as it happened, you're like, I will never do that again.
Right. It's how you learn. That's the piece about it. It's not failure. It's learning from what just occurred.
You can't fail if you learn something, right? What I find fascinating about your football background is your soul was stirred to take some time out from football to be Officer Krumke.
You know what? That's a great way of putting it. That's so awesome, because it did. Obviously, if I was using my mind, not knowing that it could impact recruiting opportunities, I probably would not have done it, but I didn't know.
Were you a junior or senior when you did that?
I was a junior. So it was my junior year, and the director of the play approached me and says, "Hey, we're trying to get some new people involved in the play." And I'm like, "Okay." And they suggested it. I'm like, "Okay." And then by the time my football coach had found out, he's like, "What are you doing?" And I just said, "Hey, I was just trying something new." And that's how I looked at it. I was trying something new.
If you're just tuning in, you don't know that Ziz played in the NFL, and then this is called 4.340 on a Friday, because that's how fast he can run.
Used to run.
I knew you were going to correct me. I'm so humble. Your soul was stirred.
Yes. Yeah. And because I
your
stuck with
mind did not get involved, because Ziz's personal brand, unbeknownst to him, is his heart. Mine's actually the brain. Which is why I know that knowledge is nothing. That's why I minimize it so much. This is all heart. And that was very much, when we're kids, I loved about teaching high school is that you get a lot more heart versus brain. You get a lot more soul stirs.
Yeah.
Because there is an interference from your iOS system. The operating system. And because of that, you do things that are really authentic and that piss off the adults, like the coach that's like, what are you doing?
And kudos to the coach, because he was there on opening night along with the other coaches.
So, yeah, they wanted their star player back. His soul was stirred as well to attend probably the only play he attended as a football coach. Now I'm scared.
Nah, that's not true. That's not true. He was just for the laugh. Yeah, it is interesting though, because really what we're talking about here is understanding the relationships you form with people and with other humans, and when they get to know you, they go, hey, you know what, maybe you should try this, or maybe, they have that conversation, that dialogue, and those dialogues tend to, hopefully, especially when you can have an impactful one, stir up the soul. So let's get to the heart. The heart of the matter.
What is the heart of the matter today, Ziz?
It's Friday. To me, Friday is a wonderful celebration. I typically pray in unison with others, and the reason why you want to pray with others is because the prayer is multiplied, and talks about just being human with other people, standing in unison, and then and hearing a message, being reminded that someone breathed a soul into your vessel, into your being.
Ooh, who was that someone, Ziz?
Well, we can say it by many, many different names sometimes. And
well, I was pointing to you were the one that breathed that breath into your lungs. It was you, your soul, that took the first breath.
Definitely. My soul that took the first breath, but probably more like I've been in the operating room when my mother of my children gave birth, and whoo, that was an experience that we'll talk about at another time. But it is amazing to see that and witness it, and just it's awe. Like it's just awe, and yeah, I mean, there's no words to describe it. I remember the first time, it's like, this is amazing. And that's the beauty of human beings. It's like, we're so amazing. And that's why we do the work that we do, because we know, we can see the answer is inside of most people, and they're fighting back and forth between that heart and the other things that just pop up and get in the way.
Yeah. Our brains have forgotten that we are born into someone else's story.
You got to explain that one to others. I get it. I always actually, just to be funny, because you used to teach his story. and
that is the story we're all born into, at least if we want to really start putting labels on patriarchy and what have you. But the story I'm talking about is the story of all of us, or all of us, hoot hoot. It's the story of us. We're all born into someone else's story, not only our parents' story. Depending on the time you were born into that world story in that moment. The neutrino stream that is in this empty space right now, you're born into that. You're born into the nurse's story and the doctor's story that's in the room. Like you were here to be conditioned in someone else's story, and then to decondition and write your own story. And that is the journey of a soul.
And the beauty of individuals along that journey with that individual or that group or whomever it happens to be is to help that individual write their own story.
Yeah. I think as parents read all the books with their mind. Parents are here to guide and shepherd their children so that they stay out of danger. They're safe. They have food and shelter. They're here to guide, though, because their child's soul knows the way. Ziz, the self-awareness that you have today about, man, I really was on my brand of heart. And man, my soul really was stirred in that moment. Those are things that you're doing naturally as children. Your soul is really guiding you, and parents are there to keep the soul safe, because sometimes the soul wants to play and experiment. But ultimately, we have to someday pick up the pen and rewrite our story that we were born into.
Yeah.
I guess that's why my brand is wisdom, huh?
Well, and tell us the quick version of that, because it's, well, the story that you talked about is when you were stirred to go into coaching, and then those individuals saying, hey, the owl is right in front of you. Maybe it's the owl that's the symbol. So talk a little bit more about that and how that came to you.
Well, it literally came to me. You got it. Like, it was just given to me, all of that. I didn't know about my personal brand was supposed to be wisdom until, January, when I picked up this book. Just like you didn't know about heart. But what it has given me is, wisdom isn't knowledge. Wisdom is the integration and the letting go of the knowledge. But there's integration that has to happen. And so my brand of wisdom is to offer the simplest solution to get you from point A to point B, which brings me to courage, if I can jump ahead. Because I think that's all that we really want to talk about with the brain. That's it. That's where we get it. And then we move on. So courage, I've been giving out courage to some of my corporate clients this week. So when a client says imposter syndrome, I'm struggling with this imposter syndrome, or like, afraid of speaking, wanting to be more courageous, I'm like, Wizard of Oz, the man behind the right. And so, and some of these clients have only seen parts of it because they're real young, and some of them are older and they remember. And so we remember the cowardly lion, right? I'm like, all right, so here's your badge. You have courage, and, here's your crown, and here's your robe. But what we talk about is the imposter syndrome, because this is where courage comes up. So what is great about the imposter syndrome? When we're afraid, we fight it. We want to get something so that we don't have to have it. And I get a couple of answers. If I say something, what's great about being an imposter? I get sometimes they'll nail it and they'll say, well, no experience bias, fresh perspective, asks questions that other people wouldn't think of, and offers solutions that maybe other people wouldn't think of. But 50-50, like, I get people that are like, nothing. You can lie. I got that once. This idea of courage is the courage to, go into your own shadow and look at what's great about it. And that takes courage to say, okay, I have my wisdom. So when I started my coach journey, I had a lot of opinions. And the more schooling I got, the more opinions I had about how, I was on my way to be an influencer and a mind hacker, but that was the shadow. So there was a lot of good gold in there. So the reason I literally gave people courage this week, that I'm like, all right, we don't have to talk about imposter syndrome ever again. And that's a fact. Every time I do this for someone, we do not talk about imposter syndrome. When they recognize they might feel that, they know what it is, and they know what the strengths are of it, and they're not afraid anymore to go into the shadow.
So it sounds like the uncovering or the discovering, whichever direction. I think there's a couple of different ways.
But you got to go into it, right? So like, like the uncovering of the blanket, if you're like, I'm thinking like a fort when you said that, then you got to go all the way in and experience the discomfort.
Right. It's movement. It's taking action.
The soul is stirred. So this is why it works, because the soul is stirred now. You've just reconnected it to what it knows to be true, which is, man, not knowing stuff is exciting. We have fresh perspectives. We don't have bias. We can lean on our skill of listening. We can name what's trying to happen and what's not, what's actually happening. Like we can be the observer when we don't know things. And this is the brand of wisdom, right? Is that I want my brain to know how to observe, not to know how to think about what it's observing, but to be able to observe it so that my soul can speak to the soul across from me.
So if you ever want to experience what Katie's talking about, go into a classroom of second graders, third graders, and they tend to be operating from that place of just blurt it out. They just, because they don't know any better. There's no filter yet.
I don't even know what you mean by know any better, because I think blurting is a great way to respond sometimes, but go on.
I mean, essentially, sometimes they are, oh, don't say that, Johnny. Don't say that. Don't say that. You know, they start to hear it from the adults in the room of like, no, don't say that now. Don't say this now. And all of a sudden, it might be just what needs to be heard, but they're being shushed. I've been, oh my goodness, sometimes just walking around in the store and you see parents interacting with their children, and it's just so interesting sometimes. I'm like, oh my God, I've counted no 40 times in a 3-minute period. But it goes down to, well, this is just one way of looking at it, because however that parent's story, and let's just say that parent has 5 children, and by the time they get to the 5th child, it's a completely different story. So the evolution to me is of individuals is just amazing. It's fun, especially if there's transformation along the way. Being intentional, which I think this is a great place to stop, because intention is an interesting aspect to explore.
Yes, and our intention is to have less theory and more practice. So we will intentionally leave you with the amount of nuggets of knowledge that we've already dropped, and invite you to go out and experiment with your heart and allow your brain to just be a backseat passenger and see what happens.
Yeah, be courageous.
That's right. Go earn your courage. Walk down the yellow brick road. And say hi to the scarecrow that's over there looking for his brain, and say, say hi to the Tin Man that's looking for his heart. And that yellow brick road is your soul's path. Just keep following it.
Very well